Hey everybody, I miss you all so much. I talked to Miss Settle and we talked about me recording a little bit of the book that we've been reading. So I have Words on Fire. We're here on my farm with my daughter and my dogs. Oop, there's Audrey. And we're just hanging out. So I thought I would read you a few chapters. And if you remember, we were at the point where Audra was learning how to smuggle. And so Milda, the lady who controls all the books, she had her testing it by carrying desserts out to see if she could get to town and back without somebody asking her. And she succeeded. And so now she's waiting for Milda to give her an assignment. So here we go. Oop, sorry. Okay. A few days passed before Milda said everything was ready. I awoke before dawn, eager to be on the road with only the farmers and bakers for company, and I hoped no soldiers. When Milda heard me stirring about, finishing up tying the new apron she had given me, she peeked from her room with her eyes half open. "Goodness, child, you can't leave yet. What reason would you possibly have to be on the road this early?" "Well, this early no one will see me." Milda just frowned. "The Cossacks are always watching, Audra. Always with someone on patrol. Be one of the dozens on the road, not one of 2 or 3. My brow furrowed as I was reminded again of Officer Rusakov and all that I'd lost since my parents had given me that book. I took a deep breath before asking, "Is it all Lithuanian books the Empire hates, or only certain ones?" Milda padded out from her room and began stirring the ashes from last evening's fire to warm some coffee. As she did, she said, "All Lithuanian books. Some might be tempted to overlook an early reader book as harmless, but it is with the young that these ideas first begin." Milda placed a book into my hands. "What is in this book, do you think?" The cover had some letters printed on it, and when I opened its pages, I saw more shapes for letters, a few of which I recognized. There were no pictures, only page after page of words. I closed it again. "It means nothing to me." "Perhaps one day you will think differently." Milda placed her hands over mine as I held the book. She pointed to the lettering on the front of it and read it for me. "The History of the Ancient Lithuanians." This, Audra, is a very important book. For how can we know who we are if we do not know who we were? Succeed with this delivery and you will give someone knowledge, and with that knowledge, you'll give them greater power in their life. I smiled up at her. "And I thought I was only giving someone a book." Milda's laugh quickly became somber. "Being caught with this book, even one book, is dangerous, so pay close attention. You must follow the lane from my house up to the neighboring village, and in the market square, you'll meet a man named Ben Kagan. This book is for him. No one else must see it or even suspect that you have it." Then she took the book and slid it into the bottom of a deep canvas sack with straps to carry it on my back. The sack was a light brown and similar to the one my father had traveled with, only slightly smaller. She began filling it with scraps of fabric. "Avoid all Cossack officers and anyone who looks at you too carefully, but do not make it look as if you are avoiding them. Guard this as if it were your most precious possession, because books are our most precious possessions." When she had finished stuffing the sack with the fabric, she looked at me directly in the eyes. "Can you do this? It's all right to say no." I wanted to say no, because I had begun to understand that this would not be a game, as it had been with the Spurgos. This was real and very dangerous. And that was more than enough to get me to tell her I wouldn't go, except that since the moment I'd agreed to transport this book for Milda, something had come alive in me. The feeling that my parents would have wanted me to do this, that from wherever they were now, they were cheering me on and maybe saying to each other, "I suppose Audra is braver than we had ever thought." I hoped I was. I hoped that despite my pounding heart, the sweat on my hands, and my unsteady legs, there was a small spark of courage. I needed to find it. I needed to prove to myself that it existed. So I nodded at Milda, placed the pack with the fabric scraps on my back, pulled on my father's shoulder bag over that, and then turned and walked out the door without looking back. Maybe if I pretended to be brave, I would become more brave. Near the same spot where I had encountered Rose with the pastry, I found her waiting again. She ran up to me, and I was sure she had hoped I'd had another pastry for her today. "Where are you going?" she asked. "On an errand for Milda," I said, and she lowered her voice. "Delivering books?" I turned sharply towards her. "Hush, Rose." She stepped back and her eyes welled with tears. So more gently I added, "It's just an errand. It's nothing of interest." I began walking again. Rose stayed at my side. "I heard your parents are being sent to Siberia." I stopped in my tracks, facing forward. That was the last thing I wanted to talk about right now, or think about. Through a clenched jaw, I said, "We don't know that. Maybe they're only in a prison." "Or Siberia." Rose shifted the weight on her feet and then said, "What if you end up going there too?" "I won't." "You might." "Yes, I might. But I couldn't dwell on that, or my journey would end right here, without me daring to take another step forward." I tilted my head toward her and with a little patience said, "I need to go now, Rose. Alone." Rose wiped a stray tear off her cheek and then said, "Good luck on your errands." By the time I reached the center of Milda's village, a few of the markets had begun to open for the day. I remembered Lucas saying he only went places that the soldiers did not. But an officer was already here this morning, and I feared if I turned back it would look suspicious. He called to me in Russian, and I waved back as if I didn't understand, hoping that would be enough. He called again, more sharply this time. From the tone of his voice, I understood he wanted me to stop. I turned toward him so that he could look at my face rather than at a sack for which I could be arrested. And then I did my best to smile, all the while reminding myself to speak to him in Russian, and hoping he would not ask my name and interpret that me speak in an illegal language. "Little girl, why are you out so early?" I shrugged. Speak in Russian, I thought. "The sooner I begin my chores, the sooner I finish them." "All chores, no school?" I wasn't sure how to answer him. I knew there were public schools designed to make its students good Russian citizens. My father would have hidden us in the forest before allowing me to go there. The only other school I knew of was the secret school beneath Milda's home, and I'd never tell him about that. "No school," I told him. He walked a circle around me, tugging on one end of a fabric scrap that had sprung loose out the top of the bag. "You work for a seamstress?" he asked. "Bringing her pieces to be made into a quilt, perhaps?" Perhaps. Whatever he wanted to believe, I'd agree with him. "Here or the next town?" he asked. I didn't know any seamstresses here, so I said, "The next town." Hopefully he wouldn't ask for the woman's name, and if he did, hopefully he wouldn't know that I was lying. "Wait here." He then walked to his horse and began digging into the saddlebags. My legs went numb, and I considered dropping my sack of fabric and making a run for it. I even loosened my grip on the handle so that if he turned back around with anything threatening, I could be halfway to the woods before he knew how to react. Except Milda had said to protect that book as if it were my most precious possession. At the moment, my life was the most precious thing I owned. The only thing I owned, really. Surely she had not meant I should give my life for this book. No, Milda would have known that might be necessary. That's why she'd given me so many warnings. When the officer turned around, I was surprised to see something familiar in his hands. Another book, only this one with very different lettering from what was written on the books in Milda's secret library. "You may have this if you want," the officer said, holding it out for me. "It's for you, a gift from the Tsar." I tilted my head, instantly suspicious. The leader of the Russian Empire didn't know me. He didn't know any of the peasant citizens of Lithuania, and even if he did, he never had sent gifts to us. No one gave us gifts unless they wanted something in return. My loyalty, perhaps? I tried not to squint back at him or to look as anxious as I was. "You may take this book, and if it interests you, maybe we can see about enrolling you in school. Teach you to read, and then you can learn how to become something more than a peasant who sells fabric scraps. Teach you to be a Russian?" I'd spoken before I thought better of it, thinking of my parents and wondering if this man in front of me had been there the night they were arrested. He probably hadn't been, but I still couldn't help but wonder. And I instantly knew it was a mistake. My tone had been too sharp, too angry. to cover, I quickly reached for the book he'd offered me. "Thank you. I would like to learn to read." His suspicion cooled, even as my cheeks heated. Not because I was frightened or because I'd made an enormous error, but because I'd just spoken aloud a truth that had stayed at the back of my mind for years, even when I denied it to my father. Papa had asked me that very question once as we sat together at the supper table. I begun to answer, but before I could, Mama told Papa she needed his help outside, and they remained out there long after supper had gotten cold. When they returned, my parents quietly continued eating, as if they hadn't been gone at all. Finally, hoping to ease the tension in our home, I said, "I have no wish to read, Papa. Another time, perhaps." That time may have finally come. I wanted to learn to read. "Don't waste that time with a peasant girl." The officer who shouted at the Cossack I was speaking to must have been his superior, for this soldier quickly straightened up and saluted. "We're going to monitor all roads north of here. We heard there might be trouble that way." That way happened to be the same direction I was headed, which meant I needed to avoid all roads from here on. My head had been ducked low while he spoke, and it was only after he left that the soldier I'd been speaking to sent me on my way. I kept the book tucked under my arm as I walked. Figured it would make me less suspicious to any other soldiers who might notice me, or at least they'd see I already had a Russian book, so what would I ever want with a hidden Lithuanian one? By midday, I'd made it to the next town, just as Milda had instructed. I hoped I was in the right place, since she hadn't given me its name, nor did this small village appear to have one. I ducked my head inside a blacksmith's stables. Just to be safe, I asked my question in Russian. "Do you happen to know a Ben Kagan?" The blacksmith looked me over like I was a bit of a mold to be scraped off his bread. "And who are you?" I drew back, unprepared for that question. Finally, in my scrambling to say something coherent, I mumbled, "A friend of his sent me here." "You're no friend of his, speaking as you do and holding that Russian book. Go away." The blacksmith returned to his work, making it clear he was finished with me. I sighed and immediately felt someone tap on my back. With a start, I looked and I saw Lucas behind me, arching his brows as if I'd done something to amuse him. "Not bad, Audra, really, for your first try." I balled up my fist and I said, "You followed me?" "Not followed you exactly. I only walked here on a separate path that allowed me to observe your actions without you or that Cossack soldier ever seeing me. Milda asked me to be sure that you were safe." He smiled and glanced down at the Russian book. "But what are you doing with that?" I held it up. "It was a gift. That soldier gave it to me. I didn't ask for it." "Why do you think it was a gift?" "Because no one will buy these little hatchets." My brows pressed together. "Little hatchet?" "Their books are their weapons, meant to swallow us up if we allow it." He took the book from me. "I know you're supposed to meet Ben, but before you do, we must make sure this book is put in a safe place, somewhere special where no one will ever bother it." He walked across the road and I followed. An old farmer happened to be passing by us, pulling a load of manure. Lucas ducked in immediately behind the cart and then shoved that Russian book into the corner of that foul-smelling load. Then he turned back to me with a big old smile. "Now that's where that belongs. Come with me, and I'll introduce you to Ben." Chapter 13. Lucas and I had taken no more steps than 3 steps forward when a wagon barreled down the street straight toward us. Its driver had a patch over one eye, and the other was zigzagging in wild alarm. His white hair struck out in every direction, and his clothes seemed so much a part of him that I suspected he might have grown into them from birth, and simply slept, bathed, and prayed in them year-round. He held the reins with one hand, and with the other tossed a long piece of canvas fabric behind him, letting it flutter in the wind to spread out its folds. Lucas muttered to me under his breath, "Audra, meet Ben. You've caught him on one of his better days." I gasped and started to dodge out of the way, but Lucas took my hand and pulled me with him towards the wagon, stepping aside barely in time to clear the horses. Ben slowed long enough to direct his attention to Lucas. "Get on or get run over. Don't care much about which one it is." "She has to come," Lucas said. I protested, but Lucas must not have heard me. Instead, the instant Ben flicked his eyes at me and nodded, Lucas grabbed me by the wrist and half tossed me onto the back of the wagon, then jumped on himself almost at the last minute as the wagon burst into full speed. I scrambled deeper into the wagon, which was filled with bundles of hay. I pushed through them and felt something hard at my feet. Books, I assumed. Of course they'd be books. No wonder I'd seen so few of them in my lifetime. Milda and Ben must have hoarded all of the books in Lithuania. Lucas raised the back of the wagon's gate and latched it, shutting us in. "Grab a corner," Ben said. I had to stand to catch the canvas, but a burst of wind tossed it out of my reach, and I stumbled, nearly losing my balance as our wagon tilted on two wheels around the bend in the road. Then Lucas caught an edge of the fabric, which brought my corner into control. Together we tucked the ends around the straw, and Ben tossed us some rope to tie everything down. "Now sit down like you belong here," he said, "and whistle if we're being followed." Of course we were being followed. Why else would he have rushed out of town like that? "Well, who's the girl?" Ben asked. Lucas started to answer for me, but Ben said, "Doesn't her voice work?" I rolled my eyes at being forced to speak when Lucas was doing a fine job of it. "My name is Audra." "No last name?" Milda had warned me against using my last name, and even if Lucas knew Ben, I didn't, nor did I particularly trust either of them. Not yet, anyways. "It's just Audra," I said. But the driver only looked me over and said, "She looks like the daughter of Henry Zaccharis. Same eyes." My head whipped back at him. "You know my family, too?" "All book carriers knew your parents." "They're still alive." When I got no response, I repeated it and said, "And I'm working on a plan to get them back again." He shrugged. "It'll never work. Even if it could, you won't be involved. I'm dropping you off at the next town as a favor to your father." "I'm supposed to stay with her," Lucas said. "Well, then I'll drop you both off," Ben said without missing a beat. "You're too young for this as well." Then he glanced back at me. "Why are you here anyway? Your parents wanted to keep you out of this business." I closed my eyes, wishing he wouldn't talk about them as if they were dead. They weren't, and I didn't appreciate him brushing off my talk of a plan to get them back as if it was just the silly idea of a girl. Unless it was just a silly idea. No single book could possibly be as valuable as my parents' lives. "So you really never knew?" Lucas asked. "Until now, you never knew about your parents' work?" "I know a little," I said, which wasn't quite true. And I wasn't at all happy that Lucas and Ben seemed to know far more about my parents than I ever had. "Well, no matter," Lucas said, smiling. "I think you'll be quite good at smuggling." I had no plans to smuggle long enough to become good at it. I had only agreed to this one delivery in honor of my parents. I sat straight up, for the first time remembering the book I carried. It was still in the sack slung from my shoulders. "Well, we've got to hide this one, too." "Agreed." Lucas looked around. We'd left the town behind and we were headed north. Where had the soldiers said that they were going to search for any signs of trouble? Here. They were searching here. "Something's wrong," I whispered. Maybe the trouble was Ben's doing or mine, or maybe it had nothing to do with us, but we would be swept up in it anyways. The Cossacks would be happy to nab anyone they considered in violation of the law. When it didn't appear that Ben had heard me, in a louder voice I said, "We've got to go back." "Can't go back," Ben said. "Somewhere behind us is an entire regiment of Cossacks." "Then get off the road." "This wagon wouldn't get far through the woods." Lucas' brow pressed low. "If you're afraid." I was plenty afraid, but that wasn't the reason I wanted off this wagon. No, my fear came from what I was about to do, what I had to do if we were going to get through the next few minutes. Before Lucas could finish his thought, I pulled the book out of the sack of fabric and tossed it at Lucas, then jumped from the side of the wagon with the sack in my arms. Alarmed by my sudden actions, Ben pulled up on the reins, but I said, "Let me go on up ahead. After 3 minutes, you can follow me." He gave me a quizzical expression, but halted the horses. I slung the sack over my shoulders again, and with my father's shoulder bag beneath me, then continued down the lane. I'd only rounded the second bend before I heard a voice called out in Russian for me to stop. And I did. 6 soldiers on horseback were waiting by the roadside. I scanned them from one end to the other, increasingly certain that I had made a terrible mistake. By the time I reached the final man, I knew this was worse than a mistake. It was a disaster. Officer Rusakov was staring at me, brows pressed low. It hadn't yet even been 2 weeks since he had arrested my parents, burned my home, and chased me into the woods. Would he recognize me? Ben had known who my parents were at first glance at my face. Was it that obvious who I was? Rusakov had already seen me coming, and his eyes narrowed as he directed his horse to the center of the road to intercept me. Maybe he didn't know who I was. Maybe he looked at everyone that way, like they were a criminal, a fugitive. Was that what I was now? He'd only seen me from behind as I ran from him, and only for a brief moment. But he had seen me. My knees went wobbly, but if I tried to run now, that would be an absolute admission of my guilt. And besides, less than 3 minutes behind me, Ben and Lucas were about to pass along this very road with a wagon full of books. I thought again of my parents, and especially my father, who I guessed had done the actual transport of books. What would he do right now? Magic. My father would do magic. I wish I knew a disappearance trick, either to make the soldiers vanish or me. I really didn't care which. Rusakov addressed me in that same low voice that had haunted my dreams every night for the past 2 weeks. Do I know you? His brows were pressed together, already suspecting I intended to lie to him. That had been the plan, but I was so nervous I'd give myself away if I lied. I'd have to play carefully with the truth. We've never met, I said, and if we had met, I'd be dead right now, I thought. Which village are you from? I tilted my head back to where I'd just been. That one, whatever its name is. I felt foolish for not having bothered to ask for the place's name. He was staring at me so closely that I wish I could melt away to nothing. Could he hear the pounding of my heart? Did he know the true reason my breaths were coming in such quick gasps? Rusakov dismounted and walked a full circle around me with his arms folded. Your blouse has dirt stains. Perhaps from the forest? It's the only dress I owned. I'm sure it's stained from many things. At least I had the new apron from Milda. Otherwise, he'd have been sure to recognize me. And what are you doing out here? I slid the sack off my shoulder and dug into it, pulling out a handful of scraps for him to see. Would you care to buy these? I'm not allowed home until I've sold them all. Rusakov frowned and yanked the sack out of my hands. He pushed one arm downward through the fabric. With the other hand, he felt around inside the bottom of the bag. He could search all he wanted. The book wasn't there anymore. When he failed to find anything, he shoved the sack back at me. But it hardly meant I was out of trouble. You say you're not allowed home until all of these have sold? Where is your home? Back in the... Who are your parents? My mind went blank. I had no idea what to say or do. Nor did he need my answer. You are Miss Zakaris. You used to live on a farm near Soliva. I began trembling, so much that he could surely see it. The corner of his lip curled. Your parents have been given a life sentence in Siberia, Rusakov said. They'll leave out on the next train in 2 days, and you will never see them again. Please, sir, what would you give to bring them home? What would you do? Anything, please. He arched a brow. Anything? I wonder if that's true. His eye flicked past me to the road. Ben's wagon was only around the bend now. Within seconds, he would come into view. Rusakov crouched down to look directly at me. Are those your friends coming? Did they send you here to distract me? I don't know who's coming, I said. If that were true, you would not look back with such fear. I realized I'd been doing the very thing and forced myself to turn to Rusakov again as he said, I'm going to let them pass. I'll let them think I've been fooled by a silly girl like yourself. And I'll do this because you are new and need time for what I am asking. I am looking for a boy near your age, a smuggler like you. He has given me a great deal of trouble." Lucas. He was looking for Lucas, who was headed directly our way right now. Rusakov continued, "Within 2 days, I want you to meet me here with that boy's name and any information you have on how to find him. Do this and I will release your parents. They will come back to you and you can be a family again. If you are not here to meet me in 2 days, then you will spend the rest of your life wondering how long they were able to survive in Siberia, or if they even made it there alive. Or you will get the answer for yourself when I arrest you for book smuggling and give you the same punishment." Ben's horses rounded the corner. Do I make myself clear? I couldn't speak, so I merely nodded and tried to hold back my tears. By then, Ben's wagon itself had come into view, but I only saw Ben whistling a tune and smiling as if he hadn't a care in the world. If Lucas was still with him, then he must have been hiding beneath the fabric to throw off any suspicion about the books. Either that, or he already knew Officer Rusakov was after him. "Halt!" Officer Rusakov ordered, walking into the center of the road to stop Ben, who pulled up on the reins and tried to not look at me from his unpatched eye. "What are you carrying?" "A delivery of straw from a farmer in Silialua. I don't even know how to say that, guys. Siluia." Ben spoke as if he was bored, as if he had been through searches like this many times. And maybe he had, but never exactly like this. Rusakov put a hand on my shoulder. "This poor girl is attempting to sell fabric scraps. Would you take her as far as Silua with you? I think she may have some luck there." Ben's head tilted, surprised at the luck he thought he was receiving. If he only knew. If he only knew. Ben offered me a hand to climb up beside him onto the wagon seat, though I couldn't even look at him. Once we left those soldiers behind, he'd congratulate me on creating a story that turned their suspicions, when in reality, I had done exactly the opposite. Instead, I'd have to tell Ben the truth, that Rusakov had offered me a way to save my parents. Or I'd tell him a lie. Let him believe that I had created a story so that the soldiers let us pass by without us being searched. I'd lie, at least until I figured out what to do about Lucas. Ben dipped his head humbly toward the Cossacks officers. "As you wish, sir." I kept my head down as we drove away, completely drained of any strength I might have had, and exhausted from the effort of pretending to be brave for so long. A full kilometer ahead, Ben finally stopped the wagon so that Lucas could come out from beneath the canvas. They both faced Ben and gave me a deep nod of respect. "You have your parents' blood indeed. Perhaps one day, when you are much older, you can become a book carrier." I lowered my eyes, deeply ashamed of myself for considering Rusakov's offer. Ben was praising me for saving books, even as I was deciding whether to turn in a person who smuggled them. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But wasn't it also wrong to refuse to help my parents, even to save their lives, when it was possible to do so? Yes, it was wrong. This was horrible, and I had no idea what to do about it. Lucas grinned at me, but said to Ben, "I prefer the term book smuggler. Anyone can carry a book, but smuggling is an art." "Smuggling is a crime," Ben countered. "Carrying is noble." "Then let Audra be noble with us. She's good, Ben. I've seen her and she has good instincts." "She'll have those same instincts when she's older." Ben turned around to face the road again. "After this delivery, we're taking her back to Milda's. It's far too dangerous for a girl this young." "It's too dangerous for all of us," Lucas said, "but we have good reasons for doing it." I had my own reasons for continuing to smuggle. Within 2 days, I could bring my parents back home. And I had better reasons for jumping off from this wagon and running as far away as I could from the books, from Lucas, and from that cruel Officer Rusakov. That's what I should do. Run from a decision I didn't want to make, because any decision I made would be awful. But I didn't run. Instead, I lowered my eyes and said, "Let me keep smuggling." If Ben heard me, he said nothing. I took his silence as a yes. All right, that was 2 chapters, guys. I'll record some more. I hope you guys are doing well on your NTI days. I miss you so very much, and hopefully I can come see you. I don't know, well, you guys will be moving on to middle school, so I won't even get to come see you. I've got to find a way to see you and celebrate with you, but I'll keep reading for you. Miss you guys. Bye.